The universe does not hurry. Nothing in space reacts quickly. Nothing rushes to happen. Nothing demands attention. Out there, everything moves. But it moves slowly. So slowly that motion feels like stillness. And stillness feels safe. Tonight, you don't need to learn anything. You don't need to remember facts. You don't need to focus or follow closely. This video is not meant to teach. It's meant to slow things down. You can listen carefully. Or let the words fade into the background. As your thoughts begin to drift. Both are perfectly fine. Space is often described as empty. But it isn't empty. It's full of distance. Full of time. Full of quiet movement. Stars burn without urgency. Galaxies drift without direction. Light travels for years. Without needing to arrive. Nothing in the universe asks to be finished quickly. And when the mind senses that scale, it begins to release pressure. Human thoughts are used to urgency. Schedules. Deadlines. Decisions. But space has none of these. There is no next. No expectation. No moment that needs to be optimized. This is why thinking about space often feels calming. Not because it distracts the mind, but because it gives the mind permission to stop rushing. Tonight, you don't need to imagine details. You don't need to picture planets or stars clearly. You can simply allow the idea of vastness to exist quietly. Vastness without danger. Darkness without threat. Silence without emptiness. Your brain responds naturally to environments that do not demand reaction. When nothing needs to be solved, the mind begins to soften. Breathing slows on its own. Muscles release tension. Without instruction. This is not something you have to do. It is something that happens. As you listen, you may notice thoughts coming and going. That's normal. You don't need to follow them. You don't need to stop them. They can move gently. Like distant stars passing through awareness. This video will move slowly. Nothing sudden will happen. Nothing important will be missed. If your attention drifts. In space, there is no central point. And in rest, there is no need to stay centered. You can let your awareness widen. Let it soften. Let it rest wherever it wants to rest. The universe continues quietly. Whether you are watching it or not. And tonight, you are allowed to do the same. Space feels silent. Not because nothing exists there, but because nothing reaches us as sound. Sound needs air. It needs pressure. It needs something to move through. And space offers none of that. Yet space is far from empty. Particles move constantly. Energy travels endlessly. Light crosses enormous distances. Without interruption. But none of it arrives as noise. And that absence of sound is deeply calming to the human brain. The nervous system is always listening. Even when you think you are relaxed, your brain continues to scan the environment. Sudden sounds. Unexpected changes. Small signals that something might require attention. Silence removes that demand. In silence, the brain no longer prepares to react. It no longer anticipates interruption. It begins to rest. This is why silence at night feels different from silence during the day. At night, silence is uninterrupted. There are fewer signals competing for attention. Fewer changes to track. And space represents the purest form of that quiet. Nothing in space calls out. Nothing demands a response. Nothing interrupts the moment. The brain interprets this not as emptiness, but as safety. Safety allows attention to soften. Instead of focusing sharply, the mind begins to widen. Thoughts slow down. Awareness spreads out. There is less pressure to hold on to any single idea. This is why images of space often feel calming rather than unsettling. Even though space is vast, even though it is unknown, it does not rush toward us. Nothing suddenly appears. Nothing approaches quickly. Everything remains distant. And distance feels safe. The brain relaxes when it knows it has time. Time to respond. Time to observe. Time to do nothing at all. In space, nothing requires immediate action. There are no alarms, no voices, no sudden shifts. Only quiet continuation. This quiet allows the mind to stop organizing constantly. During the day, the brain sorts information endlessly. What matters? What comes next? What needs attention? In silence, that sorting slows. The mind does not shut down. It simply stops prioritizing. Thoughts may still appear, but they arrive gently. They do not compete. They do not interrupt each other. They drift, much like objects in space. Slow, unhurried, without collision. This is why silence can feel surprisingly full. Not full of information, but full of space. Space for thoughts to pass through, without being held. Space for awareness to rest without focus. As you listen now, you may notice the same effect. The absence of urgency creates room. You don't need to listen for meaning. You don't need to follow every sentence. The words can simply exist, like distant signals that do not require response. Space does not ask you to understand it. It does not ask you to pay attention. It simply continues. And in that continuation, the mind finds permission to slow down. In space, time does not behave the way we are used to. Seconds still pass. Moments still exist. But nothing is measured by urgency. There are no schedules in the universe. No deadlines. No moments that must happen next. Stars live for billions of years. Galaxies form slowly, over spans of time that are difficult to imagine. Light itself can travel for thousands of years before reaching a destination. Nothing in space is in a hurry to arrive. And when the mind senses the scale, something begins to change. During the day, time feels like pressure. It moves forward. It pushes. It divides experience into tasks. What comes next? What must be done? What cannot wait? At night, those markers begin to fade. And when the brain turns its attention to space, they fade even more. Without reference points, the mind stops counting moments. Time becomes less structured. Minutes stretch. Moments feel longer. Not because time has slowed, but because the brain has stopped measuring it so precisely. The human mind is designed to track change, movement, sound, light. When these signals decrease, time loses its edges. This is why darkness and stillness make time feel different, and space represents the ultimate version of that stillness. There is no sunrise or sunset in space. No clear beginning. No clear end. Only continuation. The brain responds to this By releasing its grip on time, it no longer asks, "How long has this been happening?" It no longer asks, "What comes next?" Instead, it remains with what is. This is not confusion. It is relief. Relief from constant orientation. At night, this relief feels natural. The mind no longer needs to prepare for immediate action. There is no signal telling it to hurry. So thinking slows. Not because the brain is tired, but because it is no longer being pushed. Thoughts take more time to form. They linger. They dissolve gently. There is space between them, just as there is space between stars. In this state, the mind does not rush forward. It drifts. Awareness becomes wider, less focused on any single point. Time stops being something that moves you along. It becomes something that surrounds you. This is why thinking about the universe often feels calming, not because it distracts the mind, but because it removes the sense that something must happen soon. Nothing in space demands completion. Nothing insists on progress. Everything unfolds at its own pace. And as you listen now, you may notice the same shift. Moments feel softer. The passage of time feels less important. There is no need to keep track. No need to hold the moment. The universe continues slowly, and your mind is allowed to follow. Stars look still. When you look at the night sky, they appear fixed in place. Quiet. Unmoving. But stars are never still. They move constantly. They travel through space at incredible speeds. They orbit galaxies. They drift through vast distances. The reason they feel still is not because they aren't moving, but because their movement is slow, relative to us. Slow enough that the brain does not register urgency. This kind of movement is deeply calming. The human brain reacts differently to slow change than it does to sudden change. Sudden movement demands attention. It signals that something might require action. Slow movement does the opposite. It tells the brain that nothing needs to be done. Stars move without consequence. Nothing happens quickly. Nothing collides suddenly. Nothing interrupts the moment. This is why watching stars, or imagining them, often feels grounding. The brain notices motion, but it does not prepare to react. It simply observes. In space, motion and stillness exist together. Galaxies rotate, but over millions of years. Stars burn, but steadily. Planets orbit, but predictably. This consistency creates a sense of stability. The brain relaxes when it can predict change. When movement follows a gentle pattern, the nervous system no longer stays alert. It no longer scans for danger. It settles. This is the opposite of how movement works on Earth. Here, movement is fast, unpredictable, often loud. Cars pass suddenly. Screens change instantly. Notifications appear without warning. The brain must stay ready. In space, nothing interrupts. Nothing demands immediate awareness. Movement happens, but it happens slowly enough to feel like rest. This is why slow visuals are so effective for calming the mind. The brain enjoys continuity. When one moment blends gently into the next, thinking begins to slow. Attention widens. Thoughts lose their sharp edges. This is exactly what happens When the mind focuses on stars, even without seeing them clearly, the idea of their movement is enough. Slow, endless, unhurried. The brain mirrors what it observes. When it perceives slow motion, it slows its own internal rhythm. Heart rate decreases. Breathing becomes deeper. Muscle tension eases. This is not imagination. It is a natural neurological response to predictable, gentle change. Stillness, in this context, does not mean the absence of motion. It means the absence of urgency. Stars demonstrate this perfectly. They move, but they do not rush. They change, but they do not demand attention. And the brain understands this instinctively. As night deepens, this effect becomes stronger. Darkness removes visual noise. Stillness removes distraction. The mind no longer needs to track every small change. It no longer prepares for interruption. It simply follows the slow rhythm it is presented with. You may notice this happening now. Thoughts feel less sharp. They arrive more slowly. They dissolve without resistance. Awareness becomes broader. There is no single point that needs to be held. Like stars in the sky, thoughts exist without competing. They drift. They pass. They do not collide. This is the state where the brain feels safe enough to let go. Not because everything is understood, but because nothing is urgent. Motion continues, but nothing pushes forward. Everything moves at the pace of space, and the mind is allowed to follow. The universe never sleeps. There is no night in space, the way there is on Earth. Stars continue burning. Galaxies continue drifting. Light continues traveling. Nothing stops. And yet, nothing rushes. This combination, constant motion without urgency, is what makes the universe feel calm. At night, the human brain enters a similar state. It does not shut down. It does not turn off. It continues to think, to process, to observe. But it does so differently. During the day, the mind is narrow. It focuses on tasks, on goals, on what must happen next. At night, that narrow focus softens. Attention widens. The brain stops aiming itself at a single point. It becomes more spacious. This is why nighttime thinking feels less linear. Thoughts don't follow straight lines. They wander. They connect in unexpected ways. Just like the universe itself. There is no central direction in space. No single destination. Everything exists in relation to everything else. At night, the mind begins to mirror this structure. Thoughts are no longer forced into order. They float. They drift. They exist without needing to arrive anywhere. This can feel unfamiliar at first. The brain is used to control, used to structure, used to moving from one thing to the next. At night, that structure loosens. And when control loosens, awareness changes. The mind becomes more receptive. Not because it is weaker, but because it is no longer defending itself from constant input. During the day, the brain protects attention. It filters aggressively. It decides what matters and what does not. At night, that protection is no longer necessary. There are fewer demands, fewer interruptions. So the brain allows itself to open. This openness is what makes night feel expansive. The same way space feels expansive. There is room between thoughts, room between moments, room between sensations. Nothing presses against awareness. Nothing insists. And when nothing insists, the mind begins to rest, even while it remains awake. This is why night can feel peaceful, and also why it can feel strange. Peace and unfamiliarity often arrive together. They are both signs that the mind has left its daytime structure. Just as space exists outside human scale, night exists outside daytime rhythm. There is no schedule in the universe. And at night, the brain begins to release its own schedule. It no longer measures experience by productivity. It no longer asks, what comes next? It simply stays with what is happening now. This is not passivity. It is presence. Without pressure, the universe continues endlessly, without needing attention. And the mind at night learns to do the same. You may notice now that your awareness feels wider, less focused, less sharp. That is not a loss. It is a transition, a movement away from effort and toward rest. The universe does not collapse because it lacks urgency, and the mind does not lose itself when it stops pushing. It finds balance, just like space. At this point, the mind no longer needs information. It doesn't need new images. It doesn't need explanations. It doesn't need facts. Everything that needed to be said has already arrived. What remains now is space. Space for attention to loosen. Space for thoughts to pass through without being held. You may notice that listening feels different now. Words don't stand out as clearly. Sentences blend into one another. Meaning becomes less sharp. This is not a loss of focus. It is a shift. The mind is no longer trying to follow. It is allowing. Thoughts may still appear, but they feel softer, less demanding, less complete. They may begin and then fade before reaching an ending. This is how the mind drifts. When it no longer needs direction, there is no need to keep track of anything. No need to stay aware of the structure. You are not missing anything important. The mind is simply changing how it holds experience. At night, this drifting is natural. During the day, attention is trained to stay narrow, to hold, to focus, to complete. At night, that training relaxes. Attention widens, and then gently dissolves, like light fading. At the edge of vision, the brain recognizes that there is nothing left to prepare for. No signals are coming. No response is required. So it releases effort. This release does not happen all at once. It happens in small steps. A thought appears and is not finished. A sensation is noticed and then forgotten. Awareness floats between moments. This is not distraction. It is rest in motion. You don't need to guide this process. The brain knows how to do it. If your mind wanders, let it wander. If images appear, let them fade. If nothing happens at all, that is also fine. Nothing is expected. Nothing is being evaluated. Breathing continues, without attention. The body remains supported, without adjustment. Muscles soften, without instruction. The brain is no longer organizing experience. It is no longer sorting. It is no longer deciding what matters. Everything is allowed to exist equally. This is why drifting feels different from thinking. Thinking moves forward. Drifting has no direction. It does not arrive anywhere. It simply continues until it dissolves. You may notice that time feels unclear now. Minutes lose their shape. There is no sense of how long you have been listening. This is a sign that the mind has stopped measuring. It no longer needs to orient itself. There is nowhere to go, nothing to anticipate, just a quiet unfolding of one moment into the next, like space itself, endless, unhurried, without demand. If sleep arrives now, there is nothing you need to do. If it doesn't, there is still rest. Rest does not require sleep. It begins the moment effort ends, and effort has already begun to fade. You can let the sound of this voice become distant. You don't need to listen closely. It can exist like background noise or like silence with texture. There is nothing here that needs your attention. Only the slow continuation of the night, and the mind is free to drift. There is nothing left to follow now, nothing left to understand, nothing left to keep in mind. Everything that needed attention has already passed. The universe continues without asking anything of you. Stars keep moving. Light keeps traveling. Distance remains vast. And none of it requires awareness. Your mind no longer needs to stay with these words. They can fade when they are no longer needed, like background sound, like distant movement, like something happening far away. There is no reason to stay awake for this. Nothing important will be missed. The night does not depend on your attention. It never has. Thoughts may still appear, but they no longer need to be completed. They can arrive and leave without forming a shape. You don't need to notice them. You don't need to guide them. They will soften on their own. The brain is no longer organizing. It is no longer sorting experience into meaning or importance. Everything is allowed to exist quietly. Breathing happens without effort. The body remains supported without adjustment. Muscles stay relaxed without instruction. There is no task left for you to perform. No insight left to reach. No understanding that must happen tonight. The universe does not reach conclusions. It simply continues. And rest works the same way. It does not arrive because something is finished. It arrives when nothing is required. If sleep comes now, there is nothing to do. If it comes later, that is just as fine. The night does not measure progress. It does not care how long it takes. Time is not moving toward anything. It is simply passing. Awareness may begin to feel distant now. Sounds soften. Thoughts feel further away. Words lose clarity. This is not something to hold on to. It is something to let go of. You are not required to listen anymore. You are not required to stay present. The mind knows how to cross this space without guidance. Just as the universe moves without direction, there is no edge to this moment, no ending, only continuation. The night remains, the universe remains, and you are free to rest within it. Nothing needs to be watched. Nothing needs to be remembered. Nothing needs to be solved. Only the quiet movement of time, without urgency. Only the soft continuation of space. And the mind no longer needs to be here.